Hello, everyone. Welcome on into OneSoccer Today here on OneSoccer. Andi Petrillo, Oliver Platt, Gareth Wheeler with you. Gentlemen, we have been following the Canada soccer saga now for the better part of a year. And it seems to have come to its climax in that President Nick Bontis, well, he's no longer the president of Canada Soccer, submitting his resignation on Monday evening. His statement, he obviously talks about, landmark deals that still need to be done with the Canadian national teams. He will no longer be a part of them. And this really all started, gentlemen, as we know, with the men back in June. The good news is the men qualified for the World Cup. The bad news is with that obviously comes a lot of questions and a lot of demands from players as well. And the snowball effect really started there for Nick Bontis. But here's the thing, Ollie. The players for a while have been calling for new leadership, calling for a new voice. They felt that was needed. Why now then? Since this has been going on for a better part of the year, why now here at the end of February does Nick Bontis decide to resign?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of the question. Firstly, I want to say about Nick Bontis, I do believe that he cared deeply about Canadian soccer. I know everyone's very angry and wants a change right now and probably doesn't really want to hear that, but I think we're talking about another human being here and it's important to acknowledge it. I do believe at times as well, he was also scapegoated for things past administrations kind of handed him, things maybe other people within Canada soccer were responsible for. But ultimately, that is the job, right? And I think that's something worth bearing in mind for anyone who steps up to do this next. Is that is part of the role of being president of Canada Soccer. Is you have to wear these things. You have to take bullets at times. You have to lead, and you have to be able to cool the temperature at times. And I think that was something that maybe Nick struggled with a little bit, and the federation has struggled with a little bit, particularly over the past year. In terms of the decision, the timing, like you said, Andy, is the interesting part of it for me because I think it's been clear for some time that the players had lost confidence in the leadership. For me, that was pretty evident, certainly at least with the men's national team last summer. I was in Vancouver when the Panama game obviously was not played, and one person pretty high up, pretty leading in Canadian soccer told me directly at that time the wrong people were in the room, and there was a real feeling that the leadership would need to change if we were to make any progress here and to get a deal done and get a resolution to all of this. That was almost a year ago now. Certainly, it seems over the past, particularly over the past few weeks, probably longer than that as well. The women's national team feels the same way and has wanted a change in leadership and has kind of lost faith and lost trust there. So that brings you to the question of, well, if that's been the case for so long, why did this happen yesterday? And I think that's a really interesting one in terms of how Canadian soccer works, where the power is here, is it's because the provinces demanded it. And they're the ones who really, I think, have big influence here in terms of how this federation is run. In terms of electing a new president, they will have 60 of the 85 votes that are available to elect the new leader of the federation. The men's national team gets one vote, the women's national team gets one vote, provinces between them cumulatively 60 out of 85. So that's where the real influence is here, and that I think is what ultimately would have forced this. Don't want to put two and two together and make five, and I can't say this for sure, but it seems kind of more than a coincidence that there was a report from TSN a few days ago of the provinces being informed that their player registration fees would be increased in order to finance part of the shortfall that the federation's experiencing right now. And then a couple of days later, all of them submit a letter demanding that Nick Bontis resign. So, that's where this decision has happened. And I think that's an important one to acknowledge. Again, when we move forward and elect another president here, is to recognize that this is where the power is. This is where kind of the influence comes is from those provinces and those member associations.
Building off of that, I think we have plenty to say, and we'll take our time and we'll kind of deal with the facts as we know them and be presented and provide some context as well. But I can confirm, and I have confirmed, that there was a motion to raise the player levy. That's not necessarily in the registration fee, but the money that is given to Canadian Soccer, the National Association, from registrations amongst the provinces, which basically equates to about, I believe it's upwards of 30% of the overall budget. It was Canada Soccer went from moved to try to take $20 instead of $9 that they take in the past. I mean, it stayed at $9 for the past decade. We're in a time of inflation. That argument can be made whether or not player registration should account for that much of a Canadian soccer budget. There's also been some speculation, and I've reached out to various provinces to address this, there seemed to be a little bit of a movement to decrease the number of money that would be given to Canada Soccer by the provinces as well. Again, this is what I'm being told, but it's not confirmed at this time. And hopefully we'll have a little bit more reporting or context behind this later on in the week, perhaps even for Thursday's OneSoccer Today, because I think it's important here, because there's a lot of reasons why I think that a lot of people believed, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Andy and Ollie, but we believe that this situation was untenable with, Nick Bontis as president of Canadian Soccer. It just came to a head last summer. And for all the things, it's weird because he took over as president of Canadian Soccer in November of 2020. We're well into a pandemic at that time. It's like taking over a house on fire, because you're dealing with no registration fees coming in, no games being played. It wasn't the best time for Nick or anyone to take over this job. And whether it's money not coming in and a looming CBA deal and the push towards pay equity, like there's a lot going on. Meanwhile, unprecedented success on the field by our national teams. They deserve a lot of credit coming off a gold medal victory. The standards have shifted, a remarkable run to qualify for the World Cup the first time in 36 years. So there's a lot of things happening at once. And I think that it made that job exceptionally difficult. Was it handled in the right way by all parties? Certainly not. And Ollie brings up being in Vancouver at that time. I think that is the moment where the Canadian public, who for years, for decades, we've been covering this sport in this country, have always said that the CSA is not good enough, right? Like, this is nothing new. This is things that have been reported on. I think the media's felt scorned by the CSA over the years, and they certainly haven't done themselves any favors making allies in the media as well. And when you add Nick Bontis and Earl Cochrane getting behind that podium, the men don't want to play. They just qualified for a World Cup. And it wasn't the substance, wasn't the facts that were said at that time. I just think that the tone and tenor and the fact that they went out at that time on a podium, which made it look like them versus us, I just don't think that there was any coming back from that. And then you add to the complexities of the women pushing forward in recent months, and it certainly just was an untenable situation. So I think it was inevitable that new leadership was going to come into play. To Ollie's point, the provinces is a really interesting one. Why now? And it seems like those registration fees might have something to do with it. But we have Canada Soccer has an annual general meeting in May. I mean, he could have stepped down at that time, and it could have given like a little bit more of a runway to come up with a succession plan. Bontis's term in charge of the Canadian Soccer Association would have come to an end in the spring of 2024. Now it looks like we're at a time where, at this critical juncture, where the women are obviously negotiating with Canada Soccer, when it comes down to it, this still is a labor agreement. We need a CBA between the men and the women and the power brokers within Canadian Soccer. When you take away the president, what does the lay of the land look like? Will this allow for proceedings to move forward in a better way once you took away that figurehead from the equation? Or does this complicate things? Like, according to the bylaws, the vice president, Charmaine Crooks, will step into that role. Does she want to do that role? Is this what she signed up for? I think that there's plenty of questions how things kind of play out from here. But Nick became, Ollie used the word scapegoat. He became a divisive figure because over the years, whether it was Montopoli, Gage, Guest, Montagliani, Reed, whoever it was with the CSA, they were just known as the CSA. Now the public came to know the CSA as Nick Bontis. And, when you don't operate in the shadows, Nick has bravado. He's a very public figure. He's loud. He has that kind of grandiose approach, and it rubbed some people the wrong way. And now he's become the figurehead. And where do we go from here? I think that's the big question that we need to ask.
He was also the figurehead, to your point, Wheels, when both teams were successful at the same time, which is crazy because the success is also what brought the spotlight on the CSA, shone it a little bit more brightly, and things that were already problems just simply got highlighted. And, was he the cause of it? And that's why I do believe two things can be true. I think the CSA changes are needed. You need to make your teams happy. Communication, clarity, transparency. We've talked about all of that. That can very well be true. And whether that falls on his shoulders or not, because this clearly, as we've said, has been an issue for decades. So not necessarily on his shoulder, even though he did join in 2012, becoming the president in 2020. But what can also be true is that people don't believe he's the right leader to get them out of this mess. So both, I believe, can be true. But yeah, success, isn't it funny? Everyone wants the teams to do well under their tenure. Be careful what you wish for, because it does mean more money. It does mean demand for more resources. It does mean demand for better treatment. So,
and this, just on that quickly, Andy, like this was inevitable in my opinion. This whole thing was inevitable. We've been talking about it for years. People who have been involved in Canadian soccer have known that there is a lot to be desired in terms of the way the game is run at certain levels. As soon as that success hit, and rightly or wrongly, it is really success on the men's side because that's where the FIFA money is. That's where the big revenue is. Things were going to blow up. There was going to be a reckoning of some kind. I think it was almost inevitable, and it's a product of success. And now we have to try and find a way to come out of it with a better, healthier game. And I'm still optimistic through all of this that we'll get there. But it's been a very rocky road.
This country, like, again, this is nothing new. I know there's a lot of new people reporting on Canadian soccer, but it's always been divided. There's always been power plays and political moves being made when it comes to this. And for a lot of people, Bontis just became the target. And I understand the animosity between some players and him, and how these negotiations are never an easy thing. And he's trying to bring about change. What's really interesting about this, Andy, and we can only base things off of things that we're told and reporting and things that are said publicly. Nick has gone out from day one and was a massive advocate of pay equity. He understood what was happening in the U.S. Federation, and it took them 6 years to come up with an agreement that provided pay equity. And there was a lot of debate, a lot of hard feeling. It was tough down in the United States over the course of those 6 years getting there. But he has been a staunch supporter of trying to provide pay equity. Now, I understand that the budgetary issues and equity off the field in terms of what teams are given, that's another thing. But just in terms of pursuing pay equity, that's an issue that remains unresolved. And we're not sure where things stand on the men's side of the equation as well. And this is an individual who, at least when it came to that area of negotiations, was an ally for the women. Now that you take this individual who was dead set on coming out with a landmark agreement, what does that mean exactly? He also came out and publicly stated that he wanted, under his tenure, and obviously didn't happen, but he wanted a women's league in this country as well. And he stated that as one of his chief primary goals. We'll see what this change means for the pursuit of a women's domestic league as well. But you're right. It's not just more money and more attention coming to Canadian soccer. It brings upon new people covering the game in this country that might not lack the experience or have widespread context to provide absolute context for for situations that play out. So in the media, Nick is vilified because of suits. God forbid board members get suits, an $800 suit for the first time in a decade, but it doesn't look good because the optics are good and the PR obviously plays against them like that. Why isn't the Canadian women's team playing a home game? Well, they're playing in France a year out from the Olympics, which are going to be played in Paris in an away game against a really good team in a month's time. If the conversation went to the head coach who makes those decisions, is it a home game? Is it an away game? What's more beneficial? The thing about threatening to personally sue the players, again, when you have a union in the province of Ontario, you need to give 17 days no board notice. And that's been publicly reported again today that no board notice was given February 15th. So it's not, Nick Bontis coming out saying, I'm going to sue your. This is just like part of the legality when it comes to labor law. So although that was a threat through lawyer to lawyer, the context necessarily hasn't been there. And the fact that women haven't been paid yet, they agreed in January 2022 that they were going to defer payment until the new CBA was established. The men just got their lawyers on board last fall, and we're still at a sticking point as to what that pay equity looks like. So there's been a lot of these things, the way that things are being reported, that I don't know if it's intentionally or not. I cannot speak to that. That's a matter of opinion. But the fact remains, a lot of the stories that have been portrayed haven't necessarily given the entire context of the lay of the land. We could disagree, in terms of the facts, whether what's right or wrong or anywhere in between. But I think it's important that moving forward, that the entire story, the proper picture is being painted, which might take down the temperature just a little bit, because now we're in a position where it's seemingly everyone's airing their dirty laundry, everything's looking chaotic, and it's resulting not only in people, losing their positions. That's fine, that happens in sports, but people being publicly harassed or ridiculed or demonized, it's a tough one when it comes to this situation when emotion plays such a big role in the scenario.
I think that was part of the issue Nick had, though, right? And you can't justify harassment or anything like that. I'm not saying that for a second, but in terms of his leadership style, he is very passionate for better and for worse at times, and it felt defensive, I think, particularly to the players at times, and was maybe just not the right leadership style for this moment. So I think there is maybe some criticism there on his part in terms of how he handled certain moments, that maybe, again, just kind of raise that temperature when you need the leader of the federation to be taking it in the other direction. And at times to kind of take a loss, right? And not let their pride get in the way to move forward to ultimately a solution and to what's best for everyone here.
I think what's also, and you make great points here, especially when it comes to Canada soccer, there's this desire for things to be black or white, this or that, either or. And when you've decided to choose a side, you want to defend that side to the death. But both sides are right and both sides are wrong. And that is literally, what happens in these types of situations is you really do have to let facts and common sense prevail. So you make a lot of good points, Wheels. I mean, there are things that Nick Bontis, the CSA, did that you're like, well, wait a second, there's a reason why this happened. There's a reason why this was done. But on the other flip side, you can also look at the players. And in particular, I've spoken to a lot of the women, and they also feel, so you mentioned the union, can they legally strike, can they not? And then the threat of being sued. That's all within legal reason, to your point. But what the women see is they see them being threatened with that. And then when the men didn't play against Panama, they hear stories of Nick Bontis dropping to hold on. They hear stories of Nick Bontis dropping to his knees, begging the players to play. And you can argue that the women gave CSA a heads up that they were going to strike, whereas the men blindsided them the day of. So, but either way, right?
But
so that's what the women see.
This is what I'm talking about. Like, and the emotional side of things, you're absolutely right. But at that time, remember, the men weren't unionized. So if they decide not to play in a non-FIFA sanctioned game, then they can go on and do that. Now that they're in a players union, if they want to strike, just like the women, they need to give 17 days notice. Like, right? Like these are like, look, it's been a massive loss in terms of the court of public opinion for Canada soccer. Like, we have said this for years. They always continually shoot themselves in the foot. They're an organization that's too small. They don't pay their staff enough. Quite frankly, this is what the crux of the entire overarching conversation is. Our teams are playing on the field at the senior national team level like tier 1 nations right now. I would argue that Canada isn't a tier 1 soccer nation. We don't have the money in the game. We don't have the corporate backing. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the interest. We don't have the fan base. We don't have any of these things. So when you have the teams punching above their weight, doing exceptionally well, bringing in so many new fans and eyeballs to this game and capturing the imagination of this country, then there's this antiquated organization that doesn't have enough money, is incapable of by themselves to grow the game in this country. What do? Where's the middle ground? And there's all kinds of, add COVID into the equation, add the fact that they had to blow through budgets in order to qualify for a men's World Cup in 36 years, doing that during a pandemic in empty stadiums in Chicago and Bradenton, and having to have the guerrilla commandos with them in Haiti as a civil war is running rampant during qualifying, with COVID testing and traveling and having to isolate players and having to, like, these are exceptionally difficult times. Cathal Kelly wrote this in the Globe and Mail, and I don't have the direct quote in front of me. It's in his piece in today's. He's like, Bontis took over this, who wants this job? Like, who in their right mind wants to deal with the issues that you're dealing with right now? Like, trying to provide something. And the CSA, we're not the only country that's dealing with this. France are dealing with their own problems. Spain is dealing with their own problems. Costa Rica, like, there's a lot of countries dealing with their own problems. It's not easy to oversee an organization like this right now, but I think you both are spot on. You need to find that right personality, someone that will just work and delegate and play nice in the sandbox behind the scenes, portray this confident front end approach and someone that can provide new revenue streams. One revenue stream that I'm told is now available, and it's because legislation has changed after the CSP deal is struck. And we've seen this. You see this watching sports on television. The gambling market, in terms of like sports betting, that's outside the realm of the CSP deal. And hard liquor. These are regulations that have federally changed. And these are areas where the CSA can go and capitalize outside from the CSP deal to bring in new revenue to the association. We need people that are forward thinking and understand the corporate community and understand how to bring more to the table to grow this soccer ecosystem in this country, which is nowhere near established enough in order to keep all the balls in the air at the same time.
So I think as we move forward on this, and Ollie, here's the thing: whoever takes over this position, and I'm sure there will be some people who welcome the challenge. And you're right, we do need some forward thinking, because it's not just the women who have also suffered because of decisions. I mean, the men not getting the new kit either. I mean, there was a lot. John Herdman has also publicly said he felt like his own federation didn't have faith in the team qualifying for 2022. Hence why all these deals were not made. And it kind of came back and looked horribly. It looked horribly on CSA. It looked like a Mickey Mouse organization in this sense. But I think when it comes to equal pay here, Ollie, and this is what I think is really important for people, again, to recognize, Nick Bontis wasn't lying when he said he supported equal pay. Nick Bontis wanted equal pay. Nick Bontis knew that he had to get the men on board. So Ollie, the new president, whoever that may be, and whenever that gets announced, needs to convince the Canadian men that equal pay is different than equal percentage.
Yeah.
And do you think that that is something that will happen? How do we move forward here? Because that is the big thing for the women, right? We all agree, new leadership, new ways of thinking outside the box to bring in more revenue. We know things need to change, X, Y, Z. Like, you go down the alphabet, it needs to change. But when it comes to equal pay, that's the two teams that need to get together.
Yeah, and that's going to be a challenge, right? Is like, I think the teams have been very publicly supportive of each other, but I don't personally believe, and maybe I'm wrong, and they can come out and tell me if I am. I don't personally believe that they are quite on the same page when it comes to equal pay right now, based on what I've heard between the men's and women's national teams. So that's going to be one challenge for a new president. The other one is the other side of equity, which is equal treatment, right? And that is an incredibly complicated issue, I think, both in terms of, one, how you raise the funds in a federation that somehow seems to be just completely broke right now, in terms of all the things we're hearing about cuts being made and so on, to give the women the right kind of treatment going into the World Cup. But then two, kind of the practicalities of that. We do know that the men's World Cup qualifying path was more complicated and stretched out over a longer periods than the women's is. So how do you get to a situation where everyone's happy, but you're not necessarily, I don't think it makes sense necessarily to be spending the same exact dollar amount on completely different competitions and pathways, right? So you have to find equity in the right way there. It's going to be really challenging. What I would like to see personally is that I think there's a tendency when Canada Soccer appoints a new president that they go away to their AGM. And to be honest, no one in the media has really cared up till this point. No fans have really cared up till this point. And it's like when they choose a new pope, right? Like the smoke comes out and they've got a new president, and it's kind of just been selected without anyone having any insight into it. I would like to see an actual election here. Like the way US Soccer does it, the candidates put their names forward, put their cases forward. Ultimately, the members of Canada Soccer are going to be the ones who vote on it and decide it. But let the court of public opinion debate these candidates. Let us have them on this show and examine the cases they're making. I would love to see something like that, where we have more, again, this word we keep using of transparency, to get the right person in here that everyone can agree is kind of, the right person, the right type of leader to lead the federation forward.
Yeah. I'll say this though. I've been around long enough. I've been in Canadian soccer my entire life. I think it's a pipe dream that if you think that all parties involved are going to be on the same page with the same individual, there are clearly individual agendas. I mean, the CSA continued to say that they didn't want to negotiate in public, that this was a collective bargaining agreement. I think that this is more than that. That's just my read on the situation. There are agendas at play here, and there's preference with different parties to have different people in charge of this operation. Payout equity is part of that. It's a complicated matter. It's not like I fully support pay equity. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the way forward for international federations to move. But at the same time, we're dealing with an inequitable structure from the professional level. Like, Manchester City aren't paying their players the same thing that the men are playing. They're playing in different stadiums. There's no equity there. And at the same time, when it comes to the upcoming FIFA Women's World Cup, the winner of the last Women's World Cup, their team got paid $4 million. Canada, the men's national team, finished second from bottom in the men's World Cup, and they're given between $9 and $10 million. There isn't so there's inherent benefit for the men's team to do well, to make money for the association, and to make money for the players, especially if they're splitting the pot, not percentage. They're splitting the money down the middle. That's what's being proposed, and that needs to be figured out. And lastly, Andi, let's not forget about this. We just had an under-17 team that just qualified for the under-17 World Cup in Peru. People that I talked to around that program, there wasn't budget, or there isn't budget for them to go on and get back together before they play in Peru in order to properly prepare. This is the financial reality of Canadian soccer. If all the money, if the prize money is split 40-40-20 from things like the World Cup, or 45-45-10, or whatever it is, whatever it ends up looking like, the pool is only so deep. And guess what? The more money that are spent on charter flights, or one player to a room versus two, or two massage therapists versus one, the money has to come from somewhere. And I'm not saying that the women or the men don't deserve this, because they absolutely do. But the under 15 program, the under 17, beach, para, go down the list. There's a lot of mouths to feed here. And the more that goes in some individuals' pockets and it aren't going into other individuals' pockets, it's problematic. That's why when we get down to it, it's been said a million times, Andi, and I hear your voice all the time. Show us the numbers. That's it. Yeah. Let's understand where the money's going, what money's available, so it can be allocated in a proper way. Even when they're exposed, and I'm told the numbers have been shared privately, when they become public, is that going to be enough to satiate the needs and desires of everyone? We'll see. Because Canada soccer has always been divided, but right now, I'm not sure I've seen anything like what we've gone through over the last few months.
I'll tell you what you can cut first is the esports team. Why does
you're anti-esports?
It's the Canada Soccer Federation, not the FIFA Federation, Video Games Federation. Get rid. I've always thought that's ridiculous. Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, I know, because they're trying to become an Olympic sport. I think that's probably what the investment was, but that's a debate for another day.
I would vote for you, Andi. Andi Petrillo, president of Canada. I don't think you want to do it. Volunteer? You want to volunteer?
You know what I'm going to need? I'm going to need that shield that John Herdman purchased for the men's team.
And the sword.
Yeah, give me the shield and the sword as I'm just blocking things left, right, and center.
I'd vote for you, Andi. I would vote for you.
I'll end on this. It does appear that Nick Bontis can still hold on to his CONCACAF position. It is worth noting that he could still be called. He hasn't yet, but could still be called. As we know, the Heritage Committee has summoned the players and Canada Soccer to speak March 9th. We know that the Minister of Sport, Pascal Saint-Onge, has reached out to everybody involved in this. So a lot more will probably come to light after March 9th, maybe the end of March, because again, we know that that's when the FIFA money comes in for the World Cup. So we, are working under the assumption that the men will begin their negotiations again in earnest. We'll probably get a clear understanding of where each team stands with equal pay. And then, of course, coming out of the Heritage Committee, the show me the numbers, we'll see if anything truly nefarious was going on behind the scenes. So we have to prepare ourselves for whatever verdict then comes down from there.